Following mounting criticism, Pete Buttigieg will disclose information about his time at the management consulting firm McKenzie and Company. His campaign made an announcement yesterday after the company gave him the go-ahead to make his client list public.
Despite more scrutiny, Buttigieg is in a statistical dead heat with President Trump in Arizona right now, alongside Vice President Joe Biden. In a hypothetical head-to-head matchup with the president, Biden receives 44% of the vote and Mayor Pete gets 43%. Joining us with her take on all of this is Jennifer Holdsworth, Democratic strategist and surrogate for Pete Buttigieg and longtime friend of the show.
That's right.
Great to see you, lady.
Good morning.
So start with the theory of the case. How does Mayor Pete, what is the path to the nomination for Mayor Pete?
I think it's talking to as many voters as possible. As you can see, he's having tremendous success with his message in Iowa. He's resonating in New Hampshire. He's starting to resonate in South Carolina. As voters get to know him, they like his message even better. But he's actually not limiting his travel to the early states. He took a big swing through the South this week. So I think that as many voters as he can talk to, the better that he'll do. You know, he started in this race as a virtual unknown. He was not on the national stage. He did not spend time in Washington. And so he's really having a chance to introduce himself to voters by explaining his policy and explaining his message. And that seems to be working.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive, no doubt. Let's talk a little bit more about McKenzie. I mean, do you know a timeline on when we can expect the client list? And broadly, I mean, do you think that it's a fair criticism of Pete Buttigieg? We've seen that actually prompted by Elizabeth Warren, who, as I understand it, has some corporate work herself. Do you think that this is in bad faith by the Warren campaign, and do you think it actually matters?
I don't think it matters. I don't think it's in bad faith. I think in a primary that you have to answer very specific questions. But this isn't a question that voters are asking. This is a question that other candidates are asking. I think that you'll probably see a client list in short order. The mayor already released a full description of all the work that he did while he was there. And we have to remember that he left McKenzie to serve in the military and to serve as mayor of his town. So public service was his calling. He graduated with a very analytical degree. He wanted experience doing that analysis. This was a place to get it. And he's run one of the most transparent campaigns thus far, if not in history. And so this is not something where he was trying to hide the ball. He was subject to an NDA, and I think we can all have a conversation about NDAs and what they do to people.
Indeed.
You know. But he wanted to do the right thing, and he wanted to abide by what he had agreed to do. He wanted to abide by the law. So now that McKenzie has let him out, you're going to see even more transparency.
Okay. I saw Liz Smith, campaign manager, of course, tweeting about some of the disclosures of Elizabeth Warren in particular, that she had represented a company that was trying to keep from having to clean up a toxic site. Do you think that that's a legitimate line of attack? Do you have questions about Elizabeth Warren's work and how those square with her progressive principles today?
I don't, and I don't think the mayor does either. What I think Liz was doing, and I can't speak for Liz, though I know and love her. You know, I think what Liz was doing was saying, hey, if you're going to make disingenuous attacks, you know, let's point out that not everybody is quote unquote squeaky clean. Yeah. And I think, with all due respect, Sagar, at a time when President Trump is in the White House, we need to keep focused and keep our eye on the ball and keep talking to voters and say, hey, we all share the same values here, and we've had experience in the private sector. I know if I've had experience in the private sector where maybe you're not comfortable doing something, and then you realize, you know what, this is not for me. I want to work for the people. I want to do something better. I want to be in public service, and you do that. That's not to denigrate anything that you've done in the private sector. You know, as a corporate lawyer, I think that Senator Warren was supplementing her professorial income. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to, you know, throw stones, I think that you ought to self-reflect and you know, see what else is out there in the background. And it's really striking that this is the line of attack that the senator took, because we've been focused on the issues like healthcare and like education. And when your issues are no longer resonating or you feel like you're losing ground, unfortunately, this is the type of attack that some people turn to. But I think now we've had the conversation. I think everything's out there. I think everything's in the public realm, and we can turn back to the issues that the voters actually care about on the ground.
Yeah. So we also had the mayor. He released this new education plan. Tell us a little bit about the education plan. And he got into quite a bit of a dust-up with the Bernie Sanders and the Elizabeth Warren campaign over, I think it's $100,000 income cap, which would stop we're paying for college. Why does the mayor believe that that is the correct approach and not a free and universal program?
I think that he has a real problem with folks of lesser income paying for folks of much, much, much higher income to go to school. I think that there's a conversation to be had about whether universal programs really benefit everyone. There's a lot of universal programs in existence now, and we still have rampant inequality. So how do we better plan these issues so that everybody can take advantage of them? And if, look, across the country, in some places, $100,000 is astronomical. In some other places, like Washington, D.C. and New York City and a lot of urban centers, $100,000 is nothing. And that sounds ridiculous to say in today's economy. But I think when you approach these issues, you have to approach them very logically and through math, and that's what the mayor has done.
So here's the counterpoint, which I talked about on the show, is that if you look at the most successful social programs in American history, you're talking about Social Security, talking about Medicare, talking about K-12 education, all of which are universal. And the reason why those programs are popular and successful is because they can't be demonized as being for those people. And you know how typically from the right these attacks come. They turn everything into welfare. They racialize it. They demonize it. And then the programs get cut by both Republicans and Democrats. And that's the fear of what would happen here when you means test a program like free college. Suddenly it becomes ghettoized as for those people rather than for all Americans.
And I think the mayor is focused on building a coalition so that doesn't happen. He's got to speak to everyone who's a member of Congress, everyone in the state legislatures across the country, and the mayors in order to build a coalition and a consensus to get this done. I don't think that we can
realistic? I mean, just given the state of I mean, are you going to build a coalition with Mitch McConnell? You're going to build a coalition with Jim Jordan? How does that work?
I'm not saying that there's not bad actors out there. There are. But I think that if we sell our message to the American people, they're going to see that, unfortunately, we still have to pay for things, right? I mean, until we start printing the money, and maybe there's an argument for that, right? Though it's not the mayor's argument. We have to roll back the Trump tax cuts in order to put this into place. I don't think anybody that can deny that even with all of those programs that you mentioned, which have been life-saving over the years, that there is rampant inequality and they're not helping everybody. There are still seniors who are poor. There are still school districts across the country that are in disrepair. And so I think we have to take a very logical, mathematical approach that is compassionate, and you have to build a coalition and make your case to the people who are going to pass and fund these laws.
So MMT, like aside, I mean, from a theory perspective on consensus, I guess I'm curious about why that very much was the model under Obama, right? And that, I mean, it crashed and burned. It didn't work. And I mean, even under the Trump administration, it's largely been the same thing. Anything that's actually passed has been a monolithic thing that the entire party has to get behind. So when you say consensus, do you mean intra-democratic unity or do you mean cross-party?
It's both. Okay. It's both. And I would take some umbrage with crash and burning because I think a lot of people are covered by the ACA.
Sure.
Which is now one of the,
where Democrats had a supermajority in the Senate
they did.
and a majority in the House.
But I think it was sold very well to the folks who voted for it. Now there was some consternation about certain amendments, but now you've seen the tide turn where nearly 10 years ago there were people with pitchforks at town halls, and now it's entirely accepted. And that's because folks were not forced onto it. And I think that's where we're running into a little bit of a problem here. When people are really forced onto a program where they feel like they don't have the information quick enough when they're going into it, that can lead to some real knockdown, drag-out fights. It can lead to a lot of anxiety among the American public. And over the last 10 years, our politics has become increasingly vitriolic, and I think the mayor really wants to avoid that and say, how can we help the most people all of the time? And this is the program that's going to do it.
Sure.
So you work on fundraising on the campaign. Speak to the philosophy there. I saw a clip in the trail where Mayor Pete was challenged from a voter who said, if you want to get big money out of politics, will you commit to not doing these high-dollar fundraisers with billionaires? And he just said flat out no. Isn't it a legitimate concern for people who will have influence in a potential Pete Buttigieg administration when we see the way that donor money has shaped and molded this town?
I think there's two things here. Number one, we have to look at what fundraising pays for, right? The mayor has an incredible staff across the country that's helping him organize. Fundraisers help pay that staff a living wage. As you saw, his organizing staff joined a union and organized. We want to make sure that we're providing health care for staffers.
But other candidates are able to do that without doing high-dollar fundraisers, Sanders and Warren in particular.
That's true, although, I mean, Senator Warren still does them, and I have been to a multitude of fundraisers where both of those senators have been present, so I think it's a little bit of a disingenuous argument. What I think the mayor means by no is, number one, there's absolutely no difference in what he says at a high-dollar fundraiser, what he says at a grassroots fundraiser, or what he says at a public rally. Absolutely no difference. And with the onset of social media, that is very easily provable, because I've never been at a fundraiser where there aren't at least a couple dozen phones in the air videoing every single thing he has to say. Number two, I think that right now, all things being equal, the Democrats cannot tie their hands behind their back in the face of astronomical money coming from the Republican side and President Trump. And grassroots donations are important. They are the base of the Democratic Party. They have to be a part of any single campaign that is run right now. If you don't have grassroots support, you're not going to get the support of the voters. However, the way the laws are written right now, it would be unbelievably irresponsible to take certain things that aren't egregious off the table. I think that there's industries that the mayor will absolutely not take money from. Obviously, he's sworn off corporate PAC money. He is not taking lobbyist money. There's an absolute conflict there. But there are a lot of people who are trying to talk to the mayor at these various events about issues that are important to them, and the mayor is going to respond. So I think that if the mayor gets into office, I think one of the first initiatives you're going to see is campaign finance reform. In fact, I think that's probably a constant among any single Democrat in this field right now. We all share that value. But as the law stands right now, it would be incredibly irresponsible to take that off the table.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate it. Next on Rising, why is the former Vice President of the United States accusing Pete Buttigieg of stealing his health care plan?
Our conversation with the Young Turks' Emma Vigeland on the battle between Medicare for All who want it champions and the latest in the 2020 race when Rising continues.